Tonight, for the first time during this campaign, Chris Bowen, the Shadow Treasurer, is doing an interview with Sky News, virtue of your good offices. So thank you and congratulations on that.
Absolutely.
The Treasurer designate, if they win, is fronting up to Sky News for the first time.
He is. And I interviewed him earlier today in the Canberra Sky studio, and he was in good form. And I started off by asking him, what do you think is your assessment of the state of the economy?
Well, I think the economy obviously has plenty of downside risk in it at the moment. We've got slowing growth, very low wages growth, very high household debt, and a low savings ratio, household savings ratio. And we've had a long period of poor investment and low productivity growth. So our 27 years of uninterrupted economic growth are a wonderful thing, of course, and it's a responsibility of government to have the policy settings in place to keep that going. But we do also have to be realistic that the economy is not going as well as it should be or could be, with growth well below trend and frankly well below potential.
Well, how is Labor going to respond to that softening economy?
Well, we have a number of policies which I think will be very useful there. Of course, our bigger, better tax cuts for Australians earning under $48,000. If you're earning less than $48,000, you basically spend every dollar you get in terms of any support through tax cuts or any other thing. Also, our support for childcare for those almost 1 million families who would be impacted by our better subsidies for childcare. But I think probably the best thing, Steve, is the Australian Investment Guarantee and the New Jobs Tax Cut, both of which are tax relief for businesses, conditional on investment and or employment. The Australian Investment Guarantee applying to every single Australian business, small, medium or large, for every investment more than $20,000, enabling that to be depreciated at 20% up front in the first year, and the New Jobs Tax Cut, which is available for small business, providing tax relief for small businesses that take on younger workers or indeed older workers, those who struggle to get into the labour market the most.
Well, the Liberals claim that they're the only party that can manage the economy. Yesterday in the Fairfax 9 newspapers, you saw the modern architects of the Australian economy rebut that strongly. Is it a fair assessment when the Liberals make that criticism?
Well, clearly not. I mean, as Hawke and Keating, the two masters of economic reform, pointed out yesterday, the 27 years of uninterrupted economic growth comes from a number of factors, but foremost amongst them must be reforms by Labor governments, their Labor governments, and then, of course, getting Australia through the global financial crisis without a recession. And of course, the Liberals make this myth that they're somehow better economic managers. Well, the Labor Party has the track record of the big reforms. The Labor Party has the track record of making sure the economy works for all. Hawke and Keating, of course, got the formula right. Productivity-enhancing reforms, opening up the economy, modernising the economy, all the things that the Liberals just couldn't do. I mean, John Howard, I give him this, has conceded that he would never have been able to float the dollar. He wanted to float the dollar, but a Liberal government would never have enabled him to do it. And the float of the dollar was the key economic reform of the last 40 years. Almost everything else flows from the float of the dollar. And of course, we're going this election with our economic policy. Mr Frydenberg and Mr Morrison turn up with, well, not very much at all, really. I mean, if you look at the Treasurer's debate we had last week or earlier this week, you look at the three leaders' debates, they're primarily about Labor policy because we've got policies to debate. We turn up at the room with something to talk about. The government just comes up with a pretty empty economic agenda.
Well, Chris, we spent many budget lockups together. And
they were great days, Steve. Golden era.
And they're always a great time, as you know. But Wayne Swan promised Australians surpluses into the future. The next 4 budgets will be surpluses. Why should the Australian public believe you this time, given that Wayne Swan wasn't able to deliver a budget surplus?
Well, Steve, we could all go through the track record of forecasting budgets. They are difficult for everyone. I mean, Joe Hockey promised budget surplus in the first year of Liberal government and every year following. Here we are 6 years in and we actually don't have one yet. We've got a forecast one, but none has been delivered. So, they promised a surplus in the first year and every year following. 6 years later, we're still waiting. So we can compare track records, but In relation to our commitment of bigger budget surpluses, which will be there in relation to our costings that are being released tomorrow, surplus the same year as government and bigger budget surpluses going forward, it's not just a promise or a commitment, it's underpinned by policies. I mean, we've got the policies to deliver it. We are closing down and reforming loopholes which overwhelmingly benefit Australia's high wealth families. And we are closing down concessions or reforming concessions which have been set in, the old set and forget of the tax system. We put them in and we will never change them. Yeah, sure, they're controversial, but they're absolutely necessary for budget repair and for returning the budget to much more healthy surplus than what we are being forecast by this government. So it's not just a sort of, if you like, a political hollow commitment for a surplus. It's underpinned by clear policies which have been out there for, in some cases, many years for people to examine.
Well, even though the Liberals have been blessed by, enormous tax revenue increases back to, I think, pre-GFC levels, they've still not been able to deliver a surplus, as you say, in the 6 years. Like this
That's
year,
right.
the previous 5, no surplus. I mean, do you think they deserve to be able to pat themselves on the back about their economic management?
No, and even the forecast surplus, and of course we all hope they get there if they're still in government, and we certainly will be forecasting a surplus the same year, and indeed a bigger surplus. But even their surplus is predicated on a couple of things. Over the forward estimates, it's predicated on wages growth returning to high levels all of a sudden. They've had to downgrade wages growth in every single budget that they've brought down. Every single budget, all of them. They've said, yeah, we didn't get the wages growth we told you we'd get last year. And this year they're again forecasting high wages growth in the forward estimates, and the surplus in large part depends on it. And of course the other thing is that next year's surplus, almost a quarter of it comes from underspending on Australians with a disability through the NDIS. I mean, they shouldn't be proud of that.
Well, that's right. So, look, one of the things that surprised me in this election campaign is the Liberals thinking that they can get through it without revealing the cost of their final tranche of income tax cuts. You've seen estimates and some new ones. I'm hoping you can fill us in on about the cost of those high income tax cuts. What do you think is the actual cost? Is it 70 billion? Is that what do you think is the cost, and why are the Liberals hiding it?
Well, I mean, it's a good question as to why the Liberals are hiding it. They've been asked on multiple occasions. I mean, it's a matter of honesty and character now, frankly, Steve, not just the merits of the argument. We asked the question, we've been asking it for weeks. Matthias Kuhlmann said 25 days ago, maybe 26 now, I think, that he'd provide the dollar number. We're still waiting. Josh Frydenberg, in an interview this morning, wouldn't answer 7 times. 7 times he was asked what's the cost of the high-income tax cuts. Now, the best estimate we've seen is 77 billion. If they dispute that figure, tell us what the real figure is. Is it 70 billion? Is it 80 billion? Is it 85 billion? I mean, just fess up. What is it? So the Australian people can judge. That's all we're asking. We're not asking them to, reveal a state secret. We're asking how much these tax cuts, which they are pitching their re-election on. They're saying we're delivering tax cuts and that's why you should vote for us. Well, it's a pretty simple question. How much does the high income element cost? How much do Australians earning more than $180,000 a year stand to benefit from these tax cuts? Now, we think it's 77 billion. But Josh Frydenberg knows the figure. He knows the figure. He must do. He's the Treasurer of Australia. But he won't tell us. And Scott Morrison won't tell us. I think it's now fundamentally a matter of honesty and character for these two characters.
Well, look, you've already mentioned, and you'll be releasing the figures tomorrow, that Labor will have a bigger surplus, both next year and going forward across the forward estimates. Why is that important right now? I mean, we've talked a little bit about the possible difficulties the economy might be having, low wage growth and the impact on the revenue base for the taxpayer. Why is it important to maintain those budget surpluses now when the Reserve Bank, they've kept interest rates stable, they may cut them next week? Are you going to have a situation where fiscal policy is going in one direction and monetary policy is going in another? Why is it important to really have those surpluses in place?
It's a fair question, Steve. The way I see it, the best way of putting it is it's a buffer, or as Bill Shorten very eloquently puts it, a fighting fund for the economy. So that if things do get bad internationally, the government of the day has the capacity to put the levers into place. Now, at the moment, that capacity is pretty pretty bare in deficit, and the surplus that the government's projecting is pretty thin. As you know, emergency interest rates, or what some people would call emergency interest rates, are still in play. And there's been speculation about whether the Reserve Bank will cut further. I don't engage in that speculation, but the fact that that question is being asked is telling. And so what we need is a bigger buffer going forward. I mean, the case for the surplus is, one, it helps entrench the AAA rating. Two, it reduces your interest bill. I mean, I'd rather be spending money on schools and hospitals than interest. But three, provides a buffer so that if things do get bad internationally, whether it's a US recession or a trade war or implications of Brexit or whatever, or some sort of Chinese economic problem, whatever it is going forward, the Treasurer and the government have more capacity to respond as necessary at any given time.
Well, Chris, you took a very, very forward-leaning, big target set of policies to the 2016 election. Capital gains tax, negative gearing.
You remember it well, Steve. Yeah, that's right.
You've added to that big target with the franking credits. You've copped a lot of criticism, even in today's papers. I think one of Australia's major well-known property developers, Harry Triguboff, has said you shouldn't go ahead right now. You've had a lot of criticism. You've stuck to your guns. You think this is the right way forward to the economy. What have you got to say to Harry Triguboff today saying, just don't do it right now?
Well, with all due respect to Harry, I mean, he's got lots of views about the property market. He's always wanting something done for the property market, whether it's reducing interest rates or what have you, and he's entitled to his views and he puts them, forcefully and, fair enough. But some people argue at the timing question, and it's an excuse for opposing the policy. They don't want to admit they oppose the policy, that they just say it's not the right time. Well, this is a necessary reform, and I must say, Steve, I've been struck by the number of people. Well, you're right, it's controversial, you're right, it's noisy, but I've been struck by the number of people who've said to me directly in the street, or, when they run into me at the airport or what have you, or have written to me about it, or newspapers, whatever, and said, look, I'm a beneficiary of the current arrangements. Obviously, I enjoy getting the tax refunds when I haven't paid income tax, but I can see why it's not sustainable or fair. If the money's going to be spent on my grandkids' schools or a hospital, so I know if something goes wrong, that there's a world-class hospital there, that's okay with me. That's not a unanimous view, far from it, but it is not an insignificant view. And I think even for people who don't receive the franking credits, many of them didn't know the system exists. I've had people saying, what? You can get a tax cheque if you haven't paid income tax? When did this start? I didn't know about this, and understandably, because it wasn't really prominent in the debates until we said we'd reform it. We're the only country in the world that doesn't. It costs $6 billion a year. It's not fair, it's not sustainable, and somebody's got to have the courage to call it out. Now, what most political parties would have done is said, the shadow cabinet would have said, yeah, we're going to have to do this, this can't stay, but geez, you can't announce that before the election, they'll kill us. So let's just announce it in our first budget and we'll get it through, and we'll hope by the time the next election comes around they're forgotten. That's, to be frank, what the traditional political play would have been. Well, we're not doing that. We're being upfront with our plans, we're going out, we're seeking a mandate to do it, and we're letting the Australian people judge their policies.
Well, Chris, you've been lucky enough to join Conroy and Kroger on what we call Throwback Thursday. And with the connivance of your staff, I was at a function recently where you inadvertently described yourself as a former athlete, and the table that laughed the loudest were your staff. And they've supplied me with a photo of Chris Bowen in his younger days. It's up on screen now. Talk us through this photo. What were you doing?
I was backpacking through India, Steve, in my earlier years. I had a long sort of interest in India and a love of India, and I've been on multiple occasions, and that was my first trip to India, backpacking through. That picture there, I think, was taken in Mumbai, or it might have been Hyderabad. I can't quite remember, but yeah, I'm quite a bit younger there, aren't I?
That's a great photo, and I think that you should be showing that as evidence when you want to talk about that athletic past of yours, mate. And those laughs will have to be a little bit quieter next time. Chris Bowen, thanks so much for joining.
Thank you, Steve. It's always a pleasure, and it's great to be on Conroy and Kroger. Maybe come back after the election with a bit of luck as Treasurer.
Look forward to that interview, Chris. Good luck for the remaining part of the election.
Thank you, Steve.